The gunshot echoed through the valley as Eliza Grace ducked behind a boulder, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. Blood seeped through her fingers where she clutched her arm, the wound not deep but painful nonetheless. She hadn't expected to be ambushed on her way to Petaluma, California, but then again, she hadn't expected much of anything good to happen to her since leaving St. Louis behind. It was 1875, and the West was still wild, untamed, and unforgiving, especially to a woman traveling alone. "I know you're out there," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "I don't have anything worth stealing." The silence that followed was more unnerving than the gunfire. Eliza peered around the edge of the boulder, her chestnut hair falling in loose tendrils across her face. The vast California landscape stretched before her, golden hills rolling into the distance under the late afternoon sun. Not a soul in sight, yet someone had definitely shot at her. "If you're planning to kill me," she shouted, "you might as well face me like a man instead of hiding like a coward." A deep voice replied from somewhere to her right, "Madam, if I was planning to kill you, you'd already be dead." Eliza whipped her head around to see a tall figure emerging from behind a cluster of oak trees, leading a magnificent black stallion by the reins. His face was partially obscured by the shadow cast from his hat, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in stubble. He wasn't pointing a gun at her, which she took as a marginally good sign. "Are you the one who shot me?" she demanded, pressing harder against her wound. "Shot at you," he corrected, stepping closer. "And no, I wasn't. Those were Rowley's boys. They've been causing trouble along this trail for weeks now." He stopped a respectful distance away and removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of weathered sage. "Xavier Forrester," he said with a slight nod. "I was tracking those outlaws when I heard the commotion." Eliza regarded him suspiciously. "How do I know you're not one of them?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Because I'm bleeding too," he said, turning slightly to reveal a dark stain spreading across his left side. It was then that Eliza noticed the badge pinned to his vest. A lawman, then. Her tension eased slightly, but not entirely. She'd learned the hard way that a badge didn't guarantee honor. "You're hurt," Xavier observed, gesturing to her arm. "May I?" Reluctantly, Eliza allowed him to approach. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined her wound. "It's just a graze," he said, "but it needs cleaning. My cabin's not far from here. I can help patch you up, and you can rest there before continuing to wherever you're headed." "Petaluma," she said, wincing as he tied his bandana around her arm as a makeshift bandage. "That's still a day's ride from here," he replied, "and those outlaws might circle back. You'd be safer waiting till morning." Eliza hesitated. Every instinct told her to keep her distance, to trust no one, but she was injured, her horse had fled during the gunfire, and night would fall soon. "Fine," she conceded, "but I'll be on my way at first light." Xavier nodded, extending his hand to help her onto his horse. "I don't believe I caught your name, miss." "Eliza," she replied, accepting his assistance with reluctance. "Eliza Grace." "Well, Miss Grace, hold on tight. Midnight here isn't used to carrying two." As Eliza settled behind Xavier on the horse, careful to maintain as much distance between their bodies as the saddle would allow, she couldn't help but notice the stiffness in his posture when she lightly gripped his waist. "You should see to your own wound," she said. "It looks worse than mine." "It can wait," he replied simply. The journey to Xavier's cabin took less than an hour, winding through narrow trails that cut between hills and across a shallow stream. Eliza found herself studying the back of his neck, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape. He sat tall in the saddle despite his injury, and guided the horse with confident hands. She wondered what had brought a lawman out to this remote stretch of wilderness, far from any proper town. The cabin appeared before them as they crested a small rise, a sturdy structure of logs and stone with a wisp of smoke still rising from the chimney. A small corral stood to one side, empty now but well-maintained. "Home," Xavier said simply as he helped Eliza dismount. She noticed him wince as he swung down from the saddle himself. Inside, the cabin was unexpectedly tidy and comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a desk covered in maps and papers another. A single bed stood in the corner, neatly made with a patchwork quilt. Shelves lined with books suggested Xavier Forrester was more than just a man with a gun and a badge. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a wooden chair by the fireplace. "I'll get something to clean that wound properly." Eliza obeyed, too exhausted to argue. She watched as Xavier gathered supplies: clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey, and a small tin box she assumed contained medical supplies. His movements were methodical but hampered by his own injury. "You should tend to yourself first," she insisted. Xavier shook his head. "Ladies first," he said with that same faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "My mother would haunt me if I didn't mind my manners." As he carefully cleaned her wound, Eliza studied his face. Lines fanned from the corners of his eyes, speaking of long days in the sun and perhaps more laughter than his serious demeanor suggested. A thin scar ran along his left temple, disappearing into his hairline. "How did you end up out here?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the sting of the whiskey on her wound. "I could ask you the same question," Xavier replied, not looking up from his task. "It's not common to see a lady traveling these parts alone." "I asked first," Eliza countered. Xavier's hands paused for a moment before continuing to wrap a clean bandage around her arm. "I was a sheriff in Sacramento for 7 years, he said finally. "Decided I preferred the quiet out here." The brevity of his answer told Eliza there was much more to the story, but she didn't press. They all had secrets after all. "Your turn," he said, securing the bandage. Eliza sighed. "I'm going to Petaluma to take a position as a school teacher." "School teacher," Xavier repeated, arching an eyebrow. "You don't strike me as the schoolmarm type." "And what type do I strike you as, Mr. Forrester?" He studied her for a moment. "Someone running from something." The accuracy of his assessment unsettled her. "Well, now it's your turn to let me tend that wound," she said, changing the subject. Xavier seemed about to refuse, but then nodded, unbuttoning his vest and shirt to reveal a gunshot wound on his left side just above his hip. The bleeding had slowed, but the wound looked angry and painful. Eliza set to work cleaning it, trying to be as gentle as he had been with her. "The bullet went clean through," he said, his jaw tight with pain. "You're lucky," she murmured, pressing a cloth soaked in whiskey against the wound. Xavier let out a sharp hiss. "I've been called many things, Miss Grace. Lucky isn't usually one of them." As evening settled over the cabin, Xavier insisted Eliza take the bed while he made do with blankets by the fire. They shared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee, speaking little but watching each other carefully across the flickering light. Eliza knew she should rest, but sleep eluded her. She lay in Xavier's bed, surrounded by the unfamiliar scent of him: pine, leather, and something indefinably masculine. Through the small window, she could see stars scattered across the night sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Why Petaluma?" Xavier's voice came unexpectedly from his place by the fire. Eliza rolled to her side, peering through the darkness at his silhouette. "It's far from St. Louis," she answered honestly. "What's in St. Louis that you're running from?" "Memories," she said after a long pause. "And a man who thought he owned me." Xavier was silent for so long that Eliza thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. The law can't always protect people like it should. No, Eliza agreed, thinking of all the times the law had failed her. It can't. Morning brought clarity and a new wariness between them. Xavier moved stiffly as he prepared coffee and a breakfast of cornmeal mush, his wound clearly paining him, though he made no complaint. "I should go into town today," he said as they ate. "Get supplies, see if anyone spotted those outlaws. Petaluma's still a day's ride and you need a horse." "I can't afford to buy another horse," Eliza admitted. The journey west had depleted most of her savings. Xavier nodded as though he'd expected this. "Then I'll loan you one. You can send it back with the stagecoach driver once you're settled." Eliza stared at him, surprised by the generous offer. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Maybe I'm not as wary of strangers as you are, Miss Grace," he replied, a hint of challenge in his eyes. "You should be," she said quietly. The ride to the nearest settlement, a collection of buildings barely substantial enough to be called a town, took most of the morning. Eliza found herself studying Xavier's profile as he rode beside her on the trail, wondering at the contradictions in the man. He was clearly capable, even dangerous when needed, yet there was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his chosen profession. The town of Creek's Bend consisted of a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other buildings strung along a dusty main street. Eyes turned to watch them as they rode in, curious about the unfamiliar woman accompanying the lawman who lived in the hills. "Wait here," Xavier instructed as they dismounted outside the general store. "Won't be long." Left alone, Eliza felt uncomfortably exposed. A group of men lounged outside the saloon, watching her with undisguised interest. One of them, a burly man with a red beard, separated from the group and sauntered toward her. "Well, ain't you a pretty thing?" he drawled, stopping too close for comfort. "What's a fine lady like you doing with a man like Forrester? Don't you know he's got blood on his hands?" Eliza straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "My arrangements are none of your concern." The man chuckled, leaning closer. "Feisty too, I like that. Name's Burke. I could show you a better time than that broken-down lawman." "Step back," Eliza warned, her hand sliding to the small knife concealed in the folds of her skirt. "The lady asked you to step back, Burke." Xavier's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from the store, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. Burke's face darkened, but he retreated a few steps. "Just being friendly, Forrester. No harm in that." "Your kind of friendly tends to leave bruises," Xavier replied coldly. "Move along." After a tense moment, Burke turned and rejoined his companions at the saloon, all of them watching with barely concealed hostility. "Let's go," Xavier said quietly, helping Eliza back onto her horse. "I've got what we need." They rode in silence until Creek's Bend was well behind them. "What did he mean about blood on your hands?" Eliza finally asked. Xavier's face remained impassive. "There was an incident in Sacramento, a hostage situation at the bank. I made a call. It was the wrong one." His voice was flat, emotionless. 3 people died who shouldn't have." "Is that why you left?" "Partly," he admitted. "The town council asked me to resign, said they needed someone who could make better judgments under pressure." He glanced at her. "What about you? What happened in St. Louis?" Eliza hesitated, then decided that fair exchange was reasonable. "I was engaged to a man named Joseph Harrow. He was respected, wealthy, and cruel when no one was watching. When I tried to break the engagement, She swallowed hard. "He made it clear that I belonged to him one way or another." Xavier's expression darkened. "Did he hurt you?" "Yes," she said simply. "And when I went to the authorities, they reminded me of who Joseph was in the community and suggested I reconsider my accusations." So you ran. Eliza nodded. I ran. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached a fork in the trail, Xavier pulled his horse to a stop. The left fork leads to my cabin, he said. The right continues on to the main road to Petaluma. Eliza hesitated, surprised to find herself reluctant to part ways with this quiet, complicated man. I should continue on. I need to report to the school board by the end of the week. Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable. He reached into his saddlebag and produced a sturdy mare with a white blaze on her forehead. This is Daisy. She's steady and reliable. Like I said, you can send her back with the stage driver once you're settled. Thank you, Eliza said, genuinely moved by his kindness. For everything. Be careful on the road, he warned. Those outlaws are still out there, and you, she asked. Will you go after them alone? A grim smile touched his lips. It's what I do, Miss Grace. Impulsively, Eliza leaned over and kissed his cheek. Take care of yourself, Xavier Forrester. Before he could respond, she turned Daisy toward the right fork and urged her into a trot, not daring to look back. The journey to Petaluma proved uneventful, much to Eliza's relief. She arrived late the following afternoon, dusty and tired but pleased to find the town even more developed than she'd expected. Nestled in the rolling hills of Sonoma County, Petaluma was a thriving river port with handsome buildings of brick and stone lining the main streets, and neat wooden houses branching out from the center. The school board chairman, Mr. Peterson, greeted her warmly and showed her to the small cottage that came with her position, a tidy two-room structure behind the schoolhouse with simple furnishings and a small garden. Classes begin Monday, he informed her. 23 children, ages 6 to 16. The previous teacher left detailed notes. Over the next few days, Eliza threw herself into preparations, grateful for the work that kept her mind occupied. Still, in quiet moments, her thoughts drifted to Xavier Forrester, his gentle hands, his quiet strength, the sadness that seemed to live in his eyes. She wondered if he'd caught the outlaws, if his wound was healing properly, if he ever thought of her. 2 weeks passed, and Eliza settled into her new role. The children of Petaluma were generally well-behaved and eager to learn, though a few of the older boys tested her authority at first. She handled them firmly but kindly, earning their respect and the approval of their parents. She made a few acquaintances among the townspeople, particularly Mary Wilson, the baker's wife, who invited her to Sunday dinners and introduced her to other respectable women in town. Yet Eliza kept a certain distance, unwilling to share too much of her past. It was nearly a month after her arrival in Petaluma when the past caught up with her. She was writing arithmetic problems on the blackboard when the schoolroom door opened, admitting a cold draft and the imposing figure of Joseph Harrow. Eliza froze, the chalk slipping from her suddenly numb fingers. Class dismissed, Joseph announced smoothly, his cultured voice at odds with the rough setting. Miss Grace and I have private matters to discuss. The children looked uncertainly between Joseph and their teacher. Stay in your seats, Eliza managed, finding her voice at last. She turned to Joseph, struggling to keep her fear from showing. Mr. Harrow, this is highly inappropriate. Please leave at once. Joseph smiled, the same smile that had once charmed her before she understood the cruelty behind it. Now, Eliza, is that any way to greet your fiancé? I've traveled all the way from St. Louis to find you. I am not your fiancé, Eliza stated firmly, though her heart was racing. I ended our engagement months ago. Joseph's smile hardened. Children, he said, his eyes never leaving Eliza's face, your teacher is unwell. Go home for the day. Tell your parents she is taken ill. Something in his tone, or perhaps the dangerous glint in his eye, convinced the children to obey. They filed out quickly, several casting worried glances at Miss Grace. As soon as the last child departed, Joseph closed the door and turned the key in the lock. "You've led me on quite a chase, my dear." "How did you find me?" Eliza asked, subtly shifting to put the teacher's desk between them. "Money opens many doors," he replied, removing his gloves with deliberate slowness. "Telegraph operators, stagecoach drivers, hotel clerks, they all remember a beautiful woman traveling alone when properly incentivized." He advanced toward her, and Eliza retreated until her back pressed against the blackboard. "You embarrass me in St. Louis," Joseph continued, his voice hardening. "Left me standing at the altar while half the city looked on. Do you have any idea what that did to my reputation?" "My business connections. I'm sorry for that," Eliza said, genuinely regretful for the public nature of her departure if nothing else. "But I couldn't marry you, Joseph. Not after I saw what you truly are." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist painfully. "And what am I, Eliza?" "A man who could give you everything. Who still can, if you'll just come to your senses and return with me." "A man who hurts women," she replied steadily, despite her fear. "Who treats them like possessions. I would rather die than go back with you." Joseph's face contorted with rage. "That can be arranged if necessary," he snarled, his other hand moving to her throat. "But I'd prefer to bring you back alive. Breaking your spirit will be so much more satisfying that way." A sharp knock at the schoolhouse door interrupted the confrontation. "Miss Grace," a young voice called. "Ma sent me back with some tonic for your sickness." Joseph's grip tightened momentarily, then relaxed. "Get rid of them," he hissed, "or I'll ensure you never teach again here or anywhere." Eliza nodded, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "One moment, Tommy," she called out, her voice only slightly strained. Joseph released her and stepped back, straightening his jacket. "Smile," he instructed coldly. "Be convincing." Eliza moved to the door, unlocked it, and opened it just wide enough to see Tommy Wilson standing there with a small bottle, his face concerned. "Thank you, Tommy," she said, taking the bottle. "Please tell your mother I'm grateful. I just need some rest." "Yes, madam," Tommy replied, but his eyes darted past her to the man visible inside the schoolroom. "Ma also said to tell you that the man who loaned you Daisy is in town. He's at the livery stable." Eliza's heart leaped. Xavier was here. "Thank you, Tommy," she repeated with genuine gratitude this time. "That's good to know." She closed the door and turned to find Joseph watching her with narrowed eyes. "Who loaned you a horse?" he demanded. "A kindness from a stranger on the road," she replied, her mind racing. If she could somehow get to Xavier. Joseph clearly didn't believe her, but he seemed to decide it didn't matter. "We leave tonight," he announced. "Pack only what you need. I have a carriage waiting at the hotel. And if I refuse," his smile was chilling, "then I will inform the good people of Petaluma that their schoolteacher fled St. Louis to escape embezzlement charges. I have documentation forged, of course, but convincing, and the word of a respected businessman against that of a woman alone." He stepped closer. "And if that doesn't persuade you, I will burn this charming little schoolhouse to the ground, with you in it if necessary." Eliza believed him. She had seen firsthand the depths of his vindictiveness. "I need time to pack," she said, stalling for time. "1 hour," Joseph conceded. "I'll escort you to your cottage. Don't try anything foolish, Eliza. You know what happens when you defy me." The bruises from the last time she'd tried had taken weeks to fade. They walked together to her cottage, Joseph keeping a firm grip on her arm, his demeanor outwardly pleasant for any observers. Inside, he seated himself in her single armchair, watching as she mechanically began gathering her belongings. "You won't need much," he commented. I'll buy you new things in St. Louis. Better things." Eliza nodded absently, her mind frantically searching for a way out. Joseph would never allow her to go to the livery stable alone, and she couldn't risk bringing his wrath down on the innocent people of Petaluma. Yet the thought of returning to St. Louis with him, of being at his mercy again, was unbearable. A knock at the door startled them both. "Are you expecting someone?" Joseph asked sharply. "No," Eliza replied truthfully. Joseph rose and moved toward the door, gesturing for her to stay back. "Who is it?" he called out. "Xavier Forrester, Deputy Marshal," came the reply. "I've come about the horse." Eliza's heart raced at the sound of Xavier's voice. Deputy Marshal. He'd been a sheriff, not a marshal, when she met him. Joseph frowned, glancing between Eliza and the door. "What horse?" "The mare," Eliza explained quickly. "Daisy. I borrowed her to get here." Joseph considered for a moment, then nodded. "Get rid of him quickly," he instructed in a low voice, moving to stand behind the door where he wouldn't be immediately visible. Eliza opened the door to find Xavier standing there, hat in hand, looking much as she remembered him, tall and steady, though perhaps thinner, with new lines around his eyes. He wore a different badge now, gleaming on his vest. "Miss Grace," he said with a slight nod. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Marshal Forrester," she replied, emphasizing his title slightly. "Please come in." Xavier stepped inside, immediately tensing as he sensed Joseph's presence. His hand moved subtly toward his gun as he turned to face the other man. "Mr. Harrow, I presume?" Xavier said, surprising both of them. Joseph recovered quickly. "You have me at a disadvantage, Marshal. You know my name, but we haven't been introduced." "Telegraph from St. Louis," Xavier explained casually. "Seems you've been looking for Miss Grace rather persistently." Made some folks concerned for her welfare. Eliza glanced between the two men, hope and fear warring within her. There had been no telegraph. Xavier couldn't have known about Joseph. He was bluffing, but to what end? Joseph's expression darkened. "My fiancé left St. Louis rather suddenly." Naturally, I was concerned. "Former fiancé," Eliza corrected firmly. Xavier nodded. "That's what I understood as well. And since Miss Grace has established herself here in Petaluma, I think it's best if you respect her decision, Mr. Harrow." Joseph laughed, though there was no humor in it. "With all due respect, Marshal, this is a private matter between Eliza and myself." "Not anymore," Xavier replied, his voice hardening. "You see, I have reason to believe you're planning to remove Miss Grace from Petaluma against her will. That's kidnapping, Mr. Harrow, a federal offense." Joseph's hand moved to his jacket, and Xavier's gun appeared as if by magic, trained steadily on the other man. "Don't," Xavier warned quietly, slowly. Joseph raised his empty hands. "This is absurd. I came to escort my fiancée home. There's no law against that." "There is if she doesn't want to go," Xavier countered. "Does she, Miss Grace?" Eliza straightened her shoulders. "No, I do not want to go anywhere with Mr. Harrow. I ended our engagement months ago and left St. Louis to escape his attentions." Joseph's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful whore," he spat. "After everything I've done for you," Xavier stepped forward, his gun never wavering. "That's enough. Mr. Harrow, you have two choices. You can leave Petaluma on the evening stage, never to return. Or you can spend the night in jail and face kidnapping charges in the morning. Your decision." For a moment, Eliza thought Joseph might actually choose jail over surrender. His face flushed dark with anger and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then, abruptly, his demeanor changed. The rage disappeared behind a mask of cold calculation. "Very well, Marshal," he said smoothly. "I know when I'm outmatched. I'll take the evening stage." Xavier didn't lower his gun. "Wise choice. I'll escort you to the hotel to collect your things, then to the stage depot." Joseph turned to Eliza, his eyes promising retribution. "This isn't over, my dear. Not by a long shot." "It is over, Joseph," she replied steadily. "It was over the first time you raised your hand to me." Xavier's expression darkened at this confirmation, but his voice remained professional. "Mr. Harrow, shall we?" As Xavier escorted Joseph out, he paused at the doorway. "Lock the door, Miss Grace. I'll return once I've seen him safely out of town." Eliza nodded gratefully, her knees finally giving way as the door closed behind them. She sank into her chair, trembling with the aftermath of fear and relief. True to his word, Xavier returned 2 hours later, his expression grim but satisfied. "He's gone," he confirmed when Eliza opened the door. "Stage was heading to Sacramento. From there, I assume he'll make his way back to St. Louis." "Thank you," Eliza said fervently, stepping back to allow him inside. "How did you know? About Joseph, I mean." Xavier removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "I didn't, not specifically. I came to check on you, see how you were settling in. The stable boy mentioned a fancy gentleman asking about you, seemed concerned. Then I saw him escorting you from the schoolhouse. You looked afraid." Eliza nodded, unable to deny it. "I was. Joseph is dangerous when crossed." "Did he hurt you? Today, I mean." "No," she assured him. "But he would have eventually. That's his way." She studied Xavier's face, noting the new badge. Deputy Marshal. A faint smile touched his lips. "Temporary commission. The real marshal is laid up with a broken leg. I was tracking those outlaws through federal land, so he deputized me to make it official." "Did you catch them?" "2 of the 3, Xavier confirmed. Third one still out there somewhere." They fell silent, the small cottage suddenly feeling intimate in the gathering dusk. Eliza lit a lamp, its warm glow casting soft shadows across Xavier's rugged features. "How's your wound?" she asked, gesturing to his side. "Healed," he replied. "Yours?" "The same." Another silence fell, companionable but charged with unspoken things. "Why did you really come to Petaluma, Xavier?" He met her gaze directly. "I told myself it was to check on Daisy," he admitted. "But the truth is, I couldn't stop thinking about you." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Eliza. "I thought about you too," she confessed softly. Xavier took a step closer, then hesitated. "Eliza, I'm not a man with much to offer. My life is complicated, often dangerous. I've made mistakes that haunt me." "We all have ghosts," she replied. "Some more violent than others," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Will you be safe here, from Harrow, I mean?" "I don't know," she admitted. "He's not a man who gives up easily." "I could stay," Xavier offered. "For a while, at least. The town could use a temporary lawman while I'm waiting for word on that third outlaw." Hope fluttered in Eliza's chest. "I'd like that," she said softly. The weeks that followed took on a sweet, almost dreamlike quality for Eliza. Xavier took lodgings at the boarding house in town and assumed the role of temporary lawman with quiet efficiency. Petaluma, being generally peaceable, required little actual law enforcement, so Xavier spent much of his time helping with community projects, repairing the church roof, assisting at the livery stable, even building new desks for the schoolhouse. In the evenings, he often walked Eliza home from school, sometimes staying for supper, which she'd become increasingly adept at preparing. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives before and their hopes for what might come next. Xavier spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his move west after the war, his years as a sheriff. Eliza told him of growing up in a small town outside St. Louis, losing her parents to influenza, her brief career as a bookkeeper before meeting Joseph. Gradually, the deeper wounds were revealed. Xavier described the bank robbery in Sacramento, that had cost 3 lives, including a young mother and her child, because he'd hesitated too long before giving the order to storm the building. Eliza shared how Joseph's abuse had escalated from controlling behavior to physical violence, and how no one had been willing to believe her accusations against such a respected citizen. Their friendship deepened into something more, though both approached romance with caution. Xavier was unfailingly respectful, never presuming, always giving Eliza space to set the pace. The first time he kissed her a gentle, almost chaste touch of lips as he bid her good night at her door, she felt something long frozen within her begin to thaw. The townspeople noticed, of course. Small communities always did. But the general reaction was approval. Miss Grace and Marshal Forrester made a handsome couple, and his protective presence gave people comfort. When a band of drunk cowboys caused trouble at the saloon one night, Xavier handled the situation with firm authority that earned him further respect. Only Mary Wilson expressed concern, pulling Eliza aside after church one Sunday. "Are you certain about the marshal, dear?" she asked quietly. "I've heard rumors about his past, something about a shooting gone wrong in Sacramento." "I know about Sacramento," Eliza replied calmly. "Xavier has been honest with me about his past, just as I've been with him about mine." Mary seemed relieved. "Well, that's good then. He seems a decent sort, if a bit solemn, and the way he looks at you." She smiled knowingly. "Well, it's clear where his heart lies." 3 months after Joseph Harrow's departure from Petaluma, life had settled into a pleasant rhythm. Eliza's position as schoolteacher was secure. The children adored her, and her friendship with Xavier had blossomed into a courtship that was the subject of gentle town gossip. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by the postmaster himself rather than one of the usual boys. The envelope bore the official seal of the St. Louis Circuit Court, and Eliza's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a formal summons, requiring her presence in St. Louis to answer charges of theft and breach of contract. According to the document, Joseph Harrow alleged that Eliza had stolen family jewelry worth over $5,000 and violated a legally binding engagement contract. The letter fell from her numb fingers to the schoolroom floor. "Eliza," Xavier's voice came from the doorway. He often met her after classes now. "What's wrong?" She couldn't speak, merely pointed to the fallen letter. Xavier picked it up, his expression darkening as he read. "This is nonsense," he said finally. "You didn't steal anything." "Of course not," Eliza replied, finding her voice. "The only jewelry I ever received from Joseph was the engagement ring, which I returned. As for a binding engagement contract, no such document exists." Xavier's jaw tightened. "This is harassment. He's using the legal system to force you back to St. Louis." "And it might work," Eliza said bleakly. "If I don't appear, a judgment could be entered against me. I could be arrested. But if I do go back—" "He'll have you at his mercy," Xavier finished grimly. "We need legal advice." They took the letter to Judge Matthews, Petaluma's resident legal authority. The elderly judge examined it carefully, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "It's a genuine summons," he confirmed reluctantly. "But based on spurious claims, I'd wager." "Unfortunately, you'll need to respond in some fashion, Miss Grace. Ignoring it could indeed result in a warrant." "What are her options, Judge?" Xavier asked. The judge stroked his beard thoughtfully. "You could travel to St. Louis to contest the charges in person." "Risky, given what you've told me about this Harrow fellow. Or you could hire representation there to appear on your behalf. That would keep you safely in California but might be less effective." "Is there a third option?" Eliza asked quietly. Judge Matthews hesitated. "There is one possibility. If you were married to a California resident, Your legal domicile would shift to this state. Mr. Harrow would need to file his claims here, where he'd have far less influence, and a husband would have legal standing to contest these charges alongside you. Xavier and Eliza exchanged a startled glance. I'm not suggesting marriage solely for legal convenience, the judge added hastily. That would be inappropriate counsel. I merely mention it as a legal fact that might be relevant to your situation. They left the judge's office in thoughtful silence, walking slowly toward Eliza's cottage as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. I won't let him take you back there, Xavier said finally, his voice low and fierce. We'll find a way through this. Eliza stopped walking, turning to face him directly. Xavier, I need to know something. These past months, what we've shared, what does it mean to you? He looked startled by the directness of her question, but answered without hesitation. Everything, he said simply. You mean everything to me, Eliza. Then why haven't you ever spoken of a future together? Xavier's expression grew troubled. Because I wasn't sure I had the right to offer you one. My past is past, she interrupted. We've both done things we regret, suffered things that left scars. But that doesn't define who we are now, or who we could be together. He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. Eliza Grace, I have loved you since that first day on the trail when you faced down danger with more courage than most men I've known. I've loved you more with each passing day, with each story shared, each smile given. I didn't speak of marriage because I feared my love wasn't enough to overcome the damage in me. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. I'm too damaged to be loved, she whispered, giving voice to the fear that had haunted her since Joseph's cruelty had broken something vital within her. Xavier's hand rose to cup her cheek, his eyes holding hers with unwavering tenderness. My heart has scars too, he said softly. Maybe they match yours. Maybe that's why they fit together so well. In that moment, standing on a dusty Petaluma street with evening gathering around them, Eliza felt the last of her walls crumble. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against Xavier's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Ask me, she whispered. Xavier drew back slightly, tilting her face up to his. Marry me, Eliza. Not because of Harrow or legal strategies, but because I want to spend every day of my life loving you. Because damaged or not, scarred or not, you're the only future I want. Yes, she replied, her voice clear and certain despite the tears streaming down her face. Yes, I will marry you, Xavier Forrester. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left her breathless and trembling in his arms. When they finally parted, she saw answering tears in his eyes. Judge Matthews can perform the ceremony, Xavier said, his voice rough with emotion. Tomorrow, if you're willing. No need to wait. Eliza nodded, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow, she agreed, and then we face whatever comes together. The wedding was a simple affair, held in the church with only a few witnesses, Mary Wilson and her husband, the school board chairman Mr. Peterson, and Dr. Langley, who had become a friend to Xavier during his months in Petaluma. Eliza wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes. Mary had woven white wildflowers into her hair and lent her a lace handkerchief as something borrowed. Xavier looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new shirt and string tie, his badge polished to a high shine on his vest. Judge Matthews conducted the ceremony with dignity and warmth, pronouncing them husband and wife, just as the afternoon sun streamed through the church's stained glass windows, bathing them in multicolored light that seemed a blessing from above. The small celebration afterward at Mary's home was filled with good food, better wishes, and a sense of community that moved Eliza deeply. These people, who barely knew her, had embraced her as one of their own. And Xavier, watching her with love and pride shining in his eyes, had given her something she'd thought forever lost: a sense of belonging, of safety. That night, in her cottage, their cottage now, Eliza faced the final fear. Xavier sensed her nervousness as they stood awkwardly in the small bedroom, the intimacy of marriage suddenly very real. "We don't have to rush anything," he said gently. "I'm a patient man." Eliza shook her head. "It's not that I don't want to," she explained hesitantly. "It's just, Joseph. He wasn't always kind, even in that." Understanding and a flash of anger crossed Xavier's face. "Eliza," he said, taking her hands in his, "I would cut off my right arm before I'd hurt you. We go as slow as you need. We stop whenever you say. It only works if we're both giving freely." His words and the absolute sincerity behind them melted the last of her reservations. She stepped forward into his arms, lifting her face for his kiss. "Show me," she whispered against his lips. "Show me how it's supposed to be." And he did, with exquisite gentleness and growing passion, teaching her body to trust again, to feel pleasure without fear, to give and receive love in its most physical expression. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight spilled through the window, Eliza felt reborn. "I never knew," she murmured, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I never knew it could be like this." Xavier caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "For me either," he admitted. "Not like this, not with love." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in years, Eliza's dreams were peaceful. The response to Joseph's legal summons went out the very next day, a formal letter from Judge Matthews explaining that Eliza Grace was now Eliza Forrester, legal resident of California, and that any claims against her would need to be filed in Sonoma County Court. The judge also noted that such claims would be vigorously defended as baseless harassment, with potential countersuit for legal expenses. "Think that will stop him?" Xavier asked as they watched the letter being loaded onto the eastbound stage. "Maybe," Eliza replied. "Joseph cares about his reputation. A public legal battle that he might lose wouldn't appeal to him. And if it doesn't stop him," she turned to her husband, strength in her eyes, "then we face him together. I'm not afraid anymore, Xavier, not with you beside me." The weeks turned to months, and no further legal threats materialized from St. Louis. Life settled into a new pattern. Xavier officially accepted the position as town marshal when it was offered, while Eliza continued teaching. They moved from her small cottage to a slightly larger house on the edge of town, with room for a proper garden and perhaps, someday, children. The nightmares that had plagued them both began to fade. Xavier still occasionally woke in a cold sweat, reliving the Sacramento tragedy. But Eliza learned to hold him through these moments, her quiet strength anchoring him back to the present. Similarly, when memories of Joseph's cruelty surfaced for Eliza, Xavier's gentle patience helped dispel the shadows. They healed each other day by day, touch by touch, with honest words and tender silences. A year after their wedding, on a warm spring evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Xavier handed Eliza a small package. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Anniversary gift," he replied with an uncharacteristic hint of nervousness. "Open it." Inside the plain brown wrapping was a deed legal ownership of a parcel of land just outside Petaluma, 20 acres with a creek running through it and a view of the hills. "Xavier," Eliza breathed, scanning the document. This is wonderful, but how, when, been saving," he explained. "And doing extra work for Henley at the lumber mill. Thought maybe we could build something there, something that's truly ours from the ground up." Tears of happiness blurred Eliza's vision. "Our own home," she said softly. "Our own land." Room to grow, Xavier agreed, his hand coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach. For whatever the future brings. Eliza covered his hand with hers, a smile blooming on her face. How long have you known? Suspected for a couple weeks, he admitted. You've been tired, a bit green around the gills in the mornings. Dr. Langley confirmed my suspicions when he mentioned ordering extra tonics for expectant mothers yesterday. She laughed. So much for medical confidentiality. I was going to tell you tonight. I wanted to be sure. Xavier knelt before her chair, his face level with hers, joy and wonder in his eyes. A baby, he said, his voice hushed with reverence. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, suddenly uncertain. They hadn't explicitly discussed children, though both had mentioned wanting a family someday. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Xavier replied, gathering her into his arms. Terrified, overwhelmed, grateful, amazed. But yes, incredibly happy. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Eliza rested in her husband's embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the gentle hands that had never raised in anger, only in love. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the pain and fear, the escape, the chance meeting on a dusty trail that had changed everything. What are you thinking? Xavier asked, his breath warm against her hair. That sometimes the most damaged hearts are the ones most capable of love, she replied. Because they know its value, he nodded, understanding perfectly as he always did. And sometimes the deepest scars become the strongest bonds. The baby arrived the following winter, a healthy boy they named Thomas, after the Wilson boy whose message had helped bring them together. He had his father's solemn eyes and his mother's determined chin, and from his first lusty cry, he claimed their hearts completely. By then, their new home was nearly finished, a sturdy two-story farmhouse with wide windows to catch the light and a wraparound porch for summer evenings. Xavier continued his work as town marshal but also began raising horses, a venture that suited his patient nature and skilled hands. Eliza took a sabbatical from teaching to care for Thomas, but kept her hand in education by tutoring advanced students in their home. Word came from St. Louis that Joseph Harrow had finally married a young woman from a wealthy family with connections his business needed. Eliza felt a moment's pity for the bride, followed by profound gratitude for her own escape. You ever regret it? She asked Xavier one evening as they sat by the fire, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them. Taking in a strange, wounded woman on the trail that day. Tying your life to mine and all the complications that came with it. Xavier looked up from the bridle he was mending, his expression softening as he regarded his wife. Not for a single moment, he replied with quiet certainty. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Eliza. You and Thomas, you're everything I never dared hope for. She rose from her chair and crossed to him, settling onto his lap with a familiarity born of deep intimacy. His arms came around her automatically, holding her close. We did it, didn't we? She said softly. Built something beautiful from all that damage. Xavier's hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her smile. We're still building, he corrected gently. Every day. And I plan to keep at it for the next 50 years or so. Only 50, she teased, leaning into his touch. At minimum, he amended, bending to capture her lips in a kiss that still held the power to make her heart race. I'm a very thorough builder, Mrs. Forrester. I don't leave jobs half done. As the fire crackled and their son slumbered beside them, Eliza surrendered to her husband's kiss, to the love they had forged from broken pieces and painful pasts. Outside, the California night spread its starlit canopy over the land that was now their home, their sanctuary, their fresh beginning. They were scarred, yes, both of them. But those scars had become a map that led them to each other. To this life they were creating together, imperfect, occasionally difficult, but always worth fighting for. 3 years later, Eliza stood on their porch, watching Xavier teaching 5-year-old Thomas to ride his new pony in the fenced paddock nearby. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, their second child, a daughter. She was certain due to arrive before autumn's end. The apple trees they'd planted when they first built the house were bearing fruit now, and the vegetable garden had expanded to feed their growing family with plenty left over to share with neighbors. Petaluma had grown too, prospering as a shipping center for the region's agricultural bounty. Xavier's position as marshal had evolved into something more administrative, as the town hired deputies to handle day-to-day matters, leaving him more time for his horse breeding business, which was gaining a reputation throughout California. Eliza had returned to teaching part-time, focusing on the older students who needed preparation for college or professional training. Her classes were sought after, with several students traveling from neighboring communities to study with her. The shadows of the past had faded to distant memories. Joseph Harrow remained in St. Louis, his threats never materializing into action. The tragedy in Sacramento that had haunted Xavier found some measure of healing when the brother of one of the victims passed through Petaluma and sought Xavier out not for vengeance, but to thank him for trying to save his sister, and to let him know that the surviving family members had found peace. As Eliza watched, Xavier lifted Thomas from the pony and swung him up onto his shoulders, both of them laughing in the afternoon sunlight. Her heart swelled with love so intense it almost hurt. "Come see, Mama," Thomas called, waving excitedly. "I can ride all by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," she called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Xavier set Thomas back on the pony and led them toward the house, his smile widening as he took in the sight of his pregnant wife on the porch. Even after years of marriage, that smile still made Eliza's breath catch. "How are my girls doing?" he asked, reaching the steps and placing his hand beside hers on her belly. "Restless," Eliza replied with a laugh as the baby kicked vigorously against his palm. "She's going to be a handful, this one." "Like her mother," Xavier teased, pressing a kiss to Eliza's temple. "I was never restless," she protested. Xavier raised an eyebrow. "You traveled across half the country alone, settled in a strange town, faced down your past, and built a new life from scratch. If that's not restless, I don't know what is." "That wasn't restlessness," Eliza corrected. "That was desperation, and then hope." His expression grew serious, his eyes holding hers with the same intensity that had first captured her heart. "And now," Eliza smiled, leaning into his embrace as Thomas chatted happily to his pony. "Now," she said softly, "now is everything we hoped for. Everything we built, everything we healed." Xavier's arms tightened around her, his face buried in her hair. "I love you, Eliza Forrester," he murmured, "scars and all." "And I love you, Xavier Forrester," she replied, turning her face up for his kiss. "Scars and all." As the sun began its descent toward the distant hills, casting long golden light across their land, their home, their life together, Eliza thought of that moment on the trail years ago, wounded, afraid, certain she was too broken for happiness. How wrong she had been. How fortunate that a scarred-hearted lawman had found her, recognized her pain in his own, and offered not pity but partnership. They would face more challenges, she knew. Life had no guarantees. But whatever came, they would face it as they had everything else together, their broken pieces mended into something stronger, more beautiful for having been broken. That night, as Thomas slept and Xavier lay beside her, his hand protectively covering their unborn daughter, Eliza whispered a prayer of gratitude into the darkness. For second chances, for healing, for the love that had found them both when they least expected it and needed it most. And as she drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, even the most painful ones, led exactly where they were meant to. Their scars had not defined them, they had guided them home.